Hello and welcome to this video. So today we are going to be doing a guide or slash a methodology kind of protocol review for the lab Azure, Recon to Foothold and Profit. And so I really like this lab because it demonstrates how you can use adequate protocols in order to discover public assets and then even go further than that and get initial access off those findings. So I have here my setup, and this is kind of my ideal setup when I'm doing these Azure pen testing labs and any Azure CTFs. I'm going to have something like this, where I have my Kali on the right and my PowerShell on the left. And so we have started with the name of the company, and that is what we start with in this lab. And most likely in a lot of cases, you're going to be starting with the target name, and sometimes without even an associated website and things of that sort. However, we do know that our target is on the cloud. So what is our protocol in this stage of the engagement? Well, why don't we go ahead and try to find any publicly accessible cloud assets of that target? And I'm going to show you how to do that. So this is why I have both here, not just PowerShell or not just Kali, because sometimes I use Kali, sometimes I use the PowerShell. And for this specific scenario, we're going to be using our Kali to discover the publicly accessible cloud assets. All right. So the tool that I'm going to be using is called Cloud Enum. Cloud Enum is going to get a ton of info, all using the name of the company, Mega Big Tech. And I'm going to disable AWS and I'm going to disable GCP. Although in a scenario where in a real engagement, you're probably not going to want to disable these just because of how many companies are using multiple different cloud service providers. Let's go ahead and run this bad boy. And while it's running, let's go ahead and take a look at Cloud Enum. Cloud Enum on GitHub, just so you know where you can get it. So future of Cloud Enum, I built this tool in 2019. Now that is really impressive because to this day, from all the tools that I've tried in all my training, in my boot camp at Pwn Labs, in all 50 principles that I've hacked throughout these training labs, I have never found a tool that does it better than Cloud Enum. So this is really a tool not to sleep on. It's great. And so overview, this is a multi-cloud OSINT tool. We can enumerate public assets on all three AWS, Azure, and Cloud, and Google Cloud. And so that's one benefit from it, but not the only benefit. To me, the greatest benefit is the potential that it has for you to apply multiple targets, and not only that, but create a word list of potential targets, aka potential standard cloud asset names of that company that are tailored to that company as a list, and then it'll formulate permutations for all of those target names and create a giant word list that it checks services as you'll see. And so for Amazon, it can check S3 buckets, AWS apps. For Azure is what we're doing. It checks everything like storage accounts, open blobs, databases, VMs, and web applications. I'll show you that it does this in a little bit here. And even for GCP, it finds all of these things. And so how it works is all of these services have specific domain names, specific default domain names. And I'll show you that over here in my little list of domains. And so here, what I want to show you about specifically Azure, however, it's not restricted to just Azure. This is how it works for all of these cloud service providers, is that all of these services, all the endpoints for different APIs that our customers are using in order to access these different services, all of them have different URLs that are default. So Outlook.office and Yammer and API Skype, and all of these things also apply to these services that we're trying to find. And that's how this tool finds those things, is it takes those default service names, these default host names for the services, and then it applies the permutations to the left of it with a dash, with a dot, and things like that until it finds through brute force any publicly accessible services that are assigned to that company. And so let's take a look at here how you can install it. pip3 install. You can do this, and the way that I did it is I just cloned and I used the absolute path in order to run it. This ensures no problems with, you know, the script trying to access things that are supposed to be in the same folder and then you're running it somewhere else. That's why I always use the absolute path. And let's take a look here at what it found. So it's still not okay. Now it's done. And let's scroll up and take a look at what it found. So we find storage accounts, megabigtechconfig.blob.core. We find an open Azure container and another container, and we find some Azure file accounts here, some queue accounts, some Azure table accounts, app management accounts. We find some websites that are being hosted by the company. And so all of these things are attack paths. Like in this environment, in Mega Big Tech, none of these things are there just by accident. These are all things for you to attack. And the fact that you can enumerate things through OSINT externally, find attack paths, and then attack this environment is just crazy. And so that's why Pwn Labs is really great for doing Azure pen testing practice and all the cloud service providers. And so our target of interest is going to be this website called megabigtech.azurewebsites.net. And so let me fire up Burp Sweep here. Just keep Burp Sweep on the side no matter what, whilst we're on the web, just in case we find something funny, and we can instantly start investigating it. All right, so let's paste one of the URLs of the websites we found of the Azure infrastructure that we're attacking. And as you can see here, it looks like a static website, and there are some tabs over here. We see some names, senior developer. Looks like some potential for spraying if we find the correct emails for these users. But before we do that, let's go ahead and check the other tabs. All right, static website, and seems very demo-ish. You can't really click that many things. Now, of course, we can start to enumerate, undergo the standard web methodologies and protocols. But for the sake of time, let's go ahead and check out these users and whether or not we can kind of make some usernames out of them and see if we can start spraying. So we have an email here, kato.silla@megabigtech, and then we have 3 names over here. Now, as you can see from this email, you might assume that, okay, well, now we know the format of the users. And you're actually correct that in this specific case, the format of the user that we're going to be targeting in order to get access is the same as this email. However, I want you to think more adaptively than that. What if, as in what if, as with many IT teams, the format isn't the same, but it's only the same in a specific case? Well, in that case, we need to broaden our enumeration in order to encompass all of the different formats. And for that, we're going to be using something called username anarchy. And so let's go back to our terminal. Let me show you how username anarchy works. Go ahead and go to the lab folder. Mega Big Tech. Man, Mega Big Tech has to be the biggest environment that I've ever hacked. Like I said, I hacked about 50 principals, 50 different users, whether they are principals for an application or principals of a user or principals for some sort of website or something. I've hacked 50 of those and I'm still counting. There's still like a week or two left of the bootcamp that I'm doing in it. And there are probably going to be about 10 or 20 more principals left to hack. So it's really crazy. All right, so let's use username anarchy. So firstly, let's make a found users.txt, and we're going to be pasting all of these names. All right, and now once we have that, let's go ahead and utilize the tool I told you about, username anarchy. And so you probably guessed, username anarchy takes these names and turns them into usernames. As you can see, we got a bunch of usernames, and so let's type that into potential usernames.txt. All right. And once we have that, let's go ahead and add the Mega Big Tech domain onto it using a sed command like this. Now, if we cat it, you can see we added the megabigtech.com, and that is great. So now that we have that, I think it's time to check for correct usernames. But before we do that, let's also add that email that we already found. Go ahead and add Kato Sarah just to confirm that it's real, although it should be by the fact that it's there. All right, so in order to check for correct emails, we're going to be using a tool called O365 User Finder. And this can be found on GitHub, and I'll show you how. Let me just launch this bad boy. All right, so if I just take the name of any tool that I use in the video and I pull up my browser, I put the name as well as GitHub. And, you know, just to be safe, I'll throw in some context in there, Azure pen testing. And right away, we get the first search result as the result here, and we can click it to find that Devious has created this beautiful tool called O365 User Finder. Funnily enough, this is actually a person in the same bootcamp for Azure pen testing that we're doing on Pwn Labs. And it's crazy how many very smart people you find in these bootcamps on Pwn Labs, where they're just starting to engineer tools on the spot whilst we're doing the bootcamp. And so he made a great tool here. All you have to do is clone it and then install it with pip. And then you can use it. As always, please use the absolute path to avoid any conflicts. So let's see what we found. All right, so we got Yuki Tanaka. Awesome. Okay. So Yuki Tanaka is real, and in this stage of this hypothetical scenario, in this stage of this hypothetical red team or pen testing engagement, somebody in the rest of our pen testing team comes to us, possibly the physical team, or somebody in the inside comes to us and brings us the information for the next stage of the engagement. They come with us and give us a sticky note with a password in it. And so this sticky note has the password megadev79. And as you guessed, the protocol at this stage is to take that password and try it with Yuki Tanaka, the only user that we found based on the OSINT that we did. And doing that, we can reveal if this user exists and can be accessible with that password that we found. So let's go ahead and use our PowerShell for that. I'm going to be using AZ login, and I'll explain to you why. So AZ login -u for the username, and then -p for the password that we've been provided with. Now, why did I start with AZ login? Simply because the other authentication mechanisms authenticate you to one single API, whereas AZ login has a system where it grabs the refresh token and then it utilizes that refresh token in order to access multiple different API endpoints depending on whatever services you want to access that are accessible through Yuki Tanaka in this case. So let's go ahead and see if it works. And now that is the best part of these labs, is when you securely get authentication in an initial access portion of the lab. This is just beautiful information. So now that we have that, let's also authenticate into something else which is useful in certain cases. I'm not going to go too deep into this, but the reason why I authenticate into multiple different things is because of the principle of redundancy. Now, I know that that's something you probably heard in networking, but as a hacker, when you have redundancy in the methods of doing the same thing, then if you come into a problem, all of a sudden you have plan Bs and plan Cs, and that's a best case scenario, because especially on Azure, there is a huge lack of reliability on certain commands that do something. And so you're forced to go delve into different ways and different commands. And like I did here, different libraries that do the same thing. Connect.-az account is going to connect us to the management API. And it has a bunch of commands for that, which AZ login can also do. So let's do that. Connecting through the portal. Grab this password. All right, and now we're in, and as you can see, the subscription name does appear, and thus our authentication has no problems in this scenario. And lastly, what we're going to be authenticating with is the Graph API through this command. Connect-mggraph, and with the scopes of just simply being able to read what we're allowed to read. It's always a great starting point, and if we need a higher scope than that, then we go ahead and re-authenticate with the scope that we need. For example, if we are looking to fetch the emails that we know exist, like for example, if we find that this user has a license, let me go ahead and show you that. For example, if we use this command and it turns out that our user has a license, then in that case, we're going to be wanting to look deeper into those emails. And let's see if Yuki does. All right, so blank, and we get nothing in return. And because of that, we don't need to do it. However, I'll just show you here. We would connect to the MG graph again, but with a different scope, including mail read, in order to access the data plane that we're trying to access, which is the emails. And so firstly, in our pen testing enumeration methodology, we want to access read in order to read the resources. And once we know that a resource exists, that's when we want to delve deeper into getting the correct access, getting into the data plane of that resource, and starting to extract what we need from that resource in order to move laterally or escalate our privileges. And so now let's go ahead and see what we even have access to from this user with the get AZ resource command. And as you can see, Mega Big Tech Dev App 23. And if you see the resource type over here, it says Microsoft.web slice, Microsoft.web/sites. And so with that in mind, we can now go ahead and enumerate that using the AZ web app command. Get AZ web app, as you can probably tell, is meant to get the information of the web app. And so we dumped a bunch of information about it here, but the most thing that we're interested in is this over here. This is the default hostname of this website app. And let's go ahead and throw that into our browser and take a look at Burp. All right, so your web app is running and waiting for content. So if you're on a web app on Azure, one thing that you're going to want to try to do is access the kind of management portal area of that website. And in order to do that, all you do is after the name of the app and before the default rest of the domain name, the default rest of the host name, we can just add scm dot. And so adding this portion in between the name of the app and the azurewebsites.net, we are able to see if we can access the management portal, sort of management area of the web app. And so it needs us to sign in. And since we have access of this web app in the CLI, it's probably the case that we are the managers of the website. So let's go ahead and use our credentials. All right, and we are in. Awesome. So as you can see, the website is managed by this Kudu framework. And in, I think, all of the Azure pen testing labs that you're going to go through Pwn Labs, Kudu is what the thing is that is going to manage all of these web applications. So let's get accustomed to it a little bit and talk about what we can do in Kudu. So firstly, we have environment over here, and environment just gives us the information of the web servers that we're working on. So as you can see, we're working on a Microsoft Windows NT, and we have debug console and process explorer and tools. And so debug console is obviously what probably seems a little juicy to you. So let's go ahead and pop up this PowerShell over here. And as you can see, there are a bunch of stuff over here. And right off the bat, we have this, we have a bunch of things that we can enumerate, and especially this called all tables data.txt, and that seems pretty juicy. So why don't we go ahead and take a look at that? All right, we get nothing. So let's see what else we got. Data. And now, of course, throughout this process, you can be over here using the PowerShell, inputting your own scripts, doing a bunch of stuff that you want to explore or experiment with. That's all possible. But for the sake of simplicity, I like to use the GUI over here, and we can just take a look at what's available. Awesome. A job log. Oh, look, we got, there's a cred.sh. That's probably important. SQL export. So let's take a look at this customer data CSV. That seems pretty juicy. All right. Okay. So, all right. So doing that, we get the flag. And before you go, I know that the lab might seem like it's done here and you got the flag, but, whoa, okay. Yeah, here it is. But actually, we find this string saying find it yourself. And the reason for that, and over here, LOL. And the reason for that is because we need to go about a different method of extracting the flag from the database using SQL CMD. And it's great practice if you're not familiar with SQL CMD to do this. So let's go ahead and do that. Okay, so in order to connect to the database that is clearly existing, let's go ahead and check the environment variables if there is anything regarding the database. So we just go to the environment database in the terminal and grep for the string DB in order to see if there's anything database related. Awesome, and there is. So let's go ahead and try to connect to this database with this information that we got, password, username. And so let's go ahead and do that with this SQL CMD command. And as you can see, we did get all this information. And so let me zoom in here. This is the SQL CMD command that you're going to want to use in order to retrieve the flag and the customer information. And so that was kind of a simple lab. I know that there was no sort of bypassing being done, or any sort of custom tooling or roundabout ways of getting different access and lateral movement and stuff. But I promise you, in the other labs, it is much more sophisticated and very enjoyable. However, if you like this video, please like, subscribe, and comment, and let me know what you want to see in the future. Thank you and goodbye.